Welcome one, welcome all to the Digital Roundtable, organised by ELEMENTARYᵇ. Now, ELEMENTARYᵇ is a very successful fintech that is aimed with a laser-like focus on the CFO market of medium-sized enterprises in the UK. It's all about providing digital tools and a holistic view of management for management tools and functionality, if you like, insights, intelligence, and technology, all designed to help CFOs. I'm delighted today because we're joined by two CFOs and also a representative from the ACCA, as well as a Ned from ELEMENTARYᵇ as well, who has years of experience. So allow me immediately to introduce the panel to you. First of all, we're joined by Anthony Ball, who is the CFO of Adaptive. He's a C-level financial professional and chartered accountant with more than 20 years of experience working within capital markets community in London and in Europe. And his roles have spanned investment banking and more recently, fintech startups and the PE environment as well. So Anthony, delighted you could join us. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks very much, Julia. Nice to be here.
Pleasure. And joining Anthony is Simon Pritchard. Now, he's CFO of Adamas, ADAMAS Consulting. He's a chartered accountant with more than 30 years of experience across media, technology, and professional services businesses. So a different sector, which is fantastic to have a variety of sectors represented here today as well. Now, his roles have included CFO, COO, tax, legal, IT, HR, and mostly within established SME businesses, but also looking at, with some exposure to VC-backed tech startups as well. So organizations that are very much going through growth. So Simon, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Julia. Lovely to be here.
Pleasure, and really looking forward to your thoughts as well, as we also welcome Clive Webb. Now, let me tell you about Clive. So Clive is the head of business management in ACCA's professional insights team. So that's the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. His research portfolio deals with business and technology related matters from the perspective of chief financial officers. And he focuses on the application of digital technologies to the finance function and how they impact on both people and processes. So of course he has many opinions, from talking to, listening to, and also representing a wide membership. So Clive, thank you again, also like the others, for joining us today.
My pleasure, Julia. Nice to be here.
And last but not least is Gary Dolman. Gary Dolman is a non-executive director of ELEMENTARYᵇ. He's a PwC qualified chartered accountant who has audited, consulted, and worked for financial services firms since 1984 in London, but also in Sydney. He co-founded Monzo Bank back in 2015 and worked with the team to obtain a full banking license and to grow to more than 2 million customers with a market valuation of £2 billion, where he performed the roles of both CFO and executive director. So Gary, thank you for joining us today and for all your insights.
Thanks, Julia. Great to be here.
Wonderful. And listen, I can't wait to get into the conversation. Just very quickly for the benefit of the audience, my name's Julia Street. So this is a world that I am deeply fascinated in because in my day job as CEO and founder of Streets Consulting, I spend my time talking to and working with fintech organizations from the smallest startups to scale-ups, all the way through their growth journey as well. And of course, financial governance, financial management is a really key part of everything that entrepreneurs and their executive teams and also their investors are paying attention to. So listen, let's get straight into it. Now, I'm going to divide the conversation over the next sort of 40 or so minutes into three key areas. And I do welcome questions from the audience as well. So as we navigate through, you may want to have some thoughts in your mind. Please do use the chat function, by the way, ping them through. I'll pick those up and we will either pick them up as we go, or indeed I have allocated some time as well. So the first section, we're going to think about how CFOs and their mid-sized enterprises. So there we're thinking about organizations with turnover between about 10 million to 1 billion. That's the market segment we're talking about. We're going to think about how they've navigated the pandemic. What has that meant for CFOs in terms of how they've managed to keep businesses not only afloat, but actually unlock some opportunity as well? Secondly, we're going to focus on digitization. We're going to talk about the tools, the technologies, the insights, the platforms, the capabilities, and also what we'd like to see come through as well. And then in the third section, we're going to look ahead. We're going to see what's coming down the track and think about what the industry and the CFOs who are governing and driving growth are really thinking about. So let's get straight into it, if we may. And I want to come to you first of all, Anthony. It's the same question to everybody, but the great thing is you come at it from very different perspectives. So I'm really keen to get into how CFOs and their MMEs have weathered the COVID storm, and what you have been particularly paying attention to, and also what's been particularly challenging. Anthony.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. So I think obviously COVID caught everybody by surprise. It's a once in a generation thing that you could never plan for, really. So I think you're right to say we've weathered a storm. That storm's not yet over. It still continues, although I do think we're starting to return to some form of normality. But we sort of, when this first hit us, obviously we looked at a couple of things, and I think the way that I would explain that is we looked at the business from an operational perspective in terms of what we do, what our P&L looks like. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But then we also looked at what it meant in terms of our people, because obviously there's been huge impact on people's lives with this. So operationally, we focused on our customer service and our customer retention. Now, obviously, we always focus on that. It's very key. Customers are the king. But we made an extra special effort to ensure that we were facilitating what our customers required and change the way that we operate to make sure that we adapted to how they were operating within the sort of COVID regime that we've been under. We also focused on new business acquisition. Trying to acquire new clients in the COVID environment has been very difficult, particularly in the earlier days. We did see in the services industry a sort of return to normality to a certain extent as people realized that they could still function within COVID. But the two key things really beyond that we looked at were cash flow and liquidity and our operating expenses, obviously, because we did see some of our revenues cut back as some of our customers cut their budgets. So it was absolutely key that we made sure that all of our operating expense was value for money and that we're getting the right value for money. And then obviously everybody should concentrate on cash flow and liquidity. So we really focused on that. Now, what we have done and what we've always focused on is an operational cash flow. You see that quite a lot in small businesses, and just made sure that we had a view what was going in the bank account and what was going out of the bank account on a weekly basis. And we actually started to talk about that within EXCO because that became such a big focus for us. And obviously underpinning all of that cash flow with liquidity, there was lots of things made available by the government, CBILS loans, various bits and pieces, debt facilities. Now, we never had to use any of those, I'm happy to say, but we made sure that we put all of those in place. And then very quickly, the other side of things that we looked at, which was a huge impact and has been a huge impact for everybody, was really around our people. We had to concentrate on very strong leadership. As you see, your entire workforce become work from home, so they're remoting in. Huge, very topical issue, but staff well-being, mental health. I mean, thankfully, we'd started to do a lot of work of that before the pandemic. But one of the things that you possibly didn't realize at the start of this was it's fine if you have a home office, but obviously if you don't have a home office, you're stuck in a small flat, etc. So we did a lot of work around that, making sure we caught up with our people and made sure that they had all the right tools and all that sort of stuff to focus on, really. So it was two things, operationally and people, that we really focused on.
And it's wonderful to hear you talk about the importance of the people, because obviously this could very naturally turn into a numbers and technology discussion. So it's great that you've put that at the forefront as well. Anthony, thank you so much for your thoughts. What I'd love to do now is bring in Clive, because Clive, I mentioned in your introduction that it's a very much a membership point of view as well. Similar question to you: how have your members weathered the storm, and how is there anything they particularly paid attention to?
I think, Julia, that it's an interesting question, because I think there are almost winners and losers, as there will be in any scenario. Some organizations have really benefited. I'll explain why from the finance function perspective. Some have felt more challenged, and that's partly, I think, an evolutionary journey that finance has been on before the pandemic, and how they embrace that journey has sort of influenced what happened in the pandemic. For a lot of finance functions, it is an opportunity, and it has been an opportunity. And we look at that in four areas. There is that bit that Anthony talked about relevance. and making sure that what they are doing is really part of the decision making of the organization overall. And a lot of finance functions have really stepped up to the plate and have really embraced getting involved and really being part of the business. But to do that, they needed data. And as Anthony talked about, you need data, you need information about what's going on in the business. And most have commented it needs to be as near real time. The traditional planning, budgeting, forecasting cycles have decayed away rather naturally. We're talking about scenario modeling. We're talking about looking through the windscreen, not the rearview mirror, the journey ahead, not what hazards have passed us. Then to do that, you need to be able to analyze that data, use technology to do it, but you need the people and you need the skills. And we're seeing some dramatic changes in the skill sets. There is a skill shortage in finance, particularly for those people that have analytical skills, to some extent know Python and techniques like that. The ability to business partner and tell the story, to be a true trusted advisor, they're really, really important concepts. And then you get, okay, if I'm a trusted advisor, my fourth area becomes innovation and collaboration. So how do I become part of the business that is really looking forward? Now, some organizations lack the data and lack the investment in the systems and processes beforehand. Those are the ones that struggle more. And I think there are, particularly in the mid-tier sector, there is a squeeze around some of this area. Where they have been able to innovate before, the organizations have innovated and responded. So it is a mixed picture, but it's opportunity. But a couple of final points. Only about a third of those who responded to a survey we did recently thought this was long lasting. So this is the opportunity. This is the thought forwards. And to build on Anthony's point, the big issue is mental health and well-being, because we're not through this, and we're not through this in a long way yet.
That's very true. And I think, just one thing I would pick up, because it's wonderful to hear the kind of how the conversation also is expanding and enriching. And you talked there about leadership skills. And actually, the requirement of a CFO is changing and needs to be much more sort of digitally enabled. We're going to come on to digitization, as you know, very shortly. So, Clive, thank you for your thoughts on that. I'd love to bring in Simon at this point as well. You are the CFO of an MME. Again, reflecting on the last year and a half, talk to us about what's been challenging, what you focused on.
Yeah, so thanks, Julia. I think probably quite similar to Anthony in many respects. I suspect we're a slightly smaller business, which kind of, I think, probably just helped a little bit because of the agility we were able to sort of adopt once COVID hit. But I think one of the first things we did was just take a view that COVID was for the long term in terms of the market and our trading conditions. So we were thinking years rather than months, and I think that enabled us to sort of really sort of frame the sort of decision-making process, and it really helped us in terms of what we needed to do and how we needed to sort of look at things like our service offering, because that was essential because of the way we sort of would deliver our services prior to COVID was becoming very restricted. And so that sort of ultimately led to quite a lot of innovation, sort of using a lot of technology, talking to our clients, understanding their issues, how we could help with those, but ultimately sort of, I guess delivering or developing a whole new offering, which probably took us sort of 3-4 months to really sort of get going and get clients to sign off on. But that was kind of, it was just amazing, and it really felt like a sort of startup mentality. My previous job was in a tech startup. So that was useful because I could sort of bring those skills to the table, and I think really enabled us to transform the business in quite a short space of time. I think the other way we weathered the storm was really just by taking a much closer look at our forecasting and modelling techniques, and whereas before we would sort of typically forecast on a monthly basis, we were sort of meeting weekly. The whole senior management team, I was sort of rerunning just dozens of different scenarios to sort of look at how this might pan out, because I guess initially cash preservation was kind of the top priority, but then we started to look at how we were going to sort of recover the business and start to build the profitability again, and sort of integrate the new offering and understand how that would impact on our people as much as our clients. And then I guess also external relationships were key. So, I mean, I always worked very hard with building and maintaining those with, the banks. I mean, even HMRC, because they became pretty important to all this. And certainly all of our sort of really important vendors to sort of understand their issues, because, we didn't want sort of to struggle in terms of if they were unable to supply us or deliver their services to us. So that was pretty important. And really lastly, but I guess most importantly, was just the internal communication, just keeping all the staff informed around things like furlough, which was really key. And we made sure we were communicating sort of on a sort of mega regular basis.
I love the mega regular basis from Mark, but it's fascinating when we talk about sort of mega regular forecasting that gets accelerated into kind of a weekly update, and then even into. I really was struck by your remark about almost kind of taking on a startup mentality in order to be agile enough to adapt and to be able to change, and knowing that there were certain insights and tools that you needed in order to be able to do that. Wonderful, Simon. Thank you for that, and I'd love now, of course, to bring in last but not least Gary. So Gary, we talk about startup mentality. I mean, this is the world you inhabit, but also having been CFO at Monzo, that went from startup right the way to scale up MME status. Again, your point of view, listening to the other speakers and seeing how organisations have adapted through COVID.
Yeah, okay, as you say, Julia, my side, certainly over the last 4 years, has been in that startup scale-up space. And so if we start with what I saw happening at Monzo, is when I first started out there, the VCs who are backing companies were all about just grow, just get on and grow. That's all we want, grow your customer numbers. Then the sort of mood music changed to, well, we want to see positive customer unit economics. So your marginal revenue is exceeding your marginal cost. And if you've done that, then just grow. What happened was probably a little bit in the lead up to COVID, was that mood music started to change more to, well, actually, we do want to see a date at which you are going to become profitable. Then COVID hit, and then that's all that they wanted to see is, we're not, this jam tomorrow is not what we want. You've got to get to profitability. And that's a big problem. So if you look at somebody like Monzo, they were on the cusp of getting 100 million funding round closed. And unfortunately, that was just before we went into lockdown, and the term sheets just got pulled and the valuation then got significantly pushed down. Now, I saw that at a much smaller scale with a number of the other startups that I'm working with, where there's one that I went into to see the VC, and the VC said, yes, this will be approved next week. And it just got withdrawn because they were conserving their investment cash to back the businesses that they'd already put money into. So the only way to survive was hard decisions needed to be made, and they needed to be made quickly. And normally that meant cutting the workforce back so that you could continue to operate, but with an impact on growth. So I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about cash over the rest of this workshop, but that was the key to it. Cash was king, and you had to manage to the best of your ability and wait for sunnier times to come along.
And that's certainly sort of come out quite a lot in terms of cash preservation, having a very, very keen eye on the bank account. But it's interesting to hear your point of view and how the VC relationship conversation has shifted as well. So thank you. Well, listen, I'm really keen now to like a cog shift along, if you like, to talk about technology. It's not surprising because obviously this is what ELEMENTARY:B is focused on, but it is really interesting when we think about you've all talked about having those who have been successful will have data to hand, those who have got the insights, the real-time insights, that there's a shifting appetite to be able to have this information at your fingertips, and then to be able to use that data to empower decision-making on a much more frequent basis because of the external pressures as well as the internal as well. If I could come to you, Simon, first of all, on this conversation about digitization, what role do you see it playing in terms of fueling growth, and what tools do you need? And if you had a wish list, if you like, what would you like to have at your fingertips?
Yeah, so I think initially, Julia, for me, it's about the sort of consolidation of the data. I mean, I call it big data. I'm not a huge organization, but I think sort of the term works because having seen the proliferation of the tech platforms that have come in to help areas of the business like the CRM, the sales side of the business, operations, resource planning, HR. I mean, those are great, but what you sort of start to find is that everybody's sort of encroaching other sort of people's areas, and that sort of really important sort of one source of truth that every business needs in its data. It can become quite challenging. So I think within finance and the sort of overall capture of all of that, some tools to help really sort of bring that together, because ultimately I think the whoever the senior finance person is, that person really has to have their arms around all of that data. And what you see is lots of different sort of people around the organization sort of tapping into these platforms. And I don't think there's been much really to help the CFO do that, as the sort of the tech world has sort of sprung up with all of these amazing solutions. Specifically, I'd say planning and budgeting tools. I probably speak for many FDs and CFOs in terms of, how many layers of Excel, how many more Excel spreadsheets can I add to the mix, and have to sort of grapple with the sort of formula errors. And it's typically just when you most need your financial model in a moment of crisis, that's when something it goes wrong. And there's the constant updating, version control, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's really lacking. And something I'd love to see coming through, a bit more AI in the sort of forecasting side of the business, which is very achievable. There's probably stuff out there that I just haven't come across to help with that. Basic things like reporting and dashboards, these kind of finance systems come with these great promises, but they're no good unless you're sort of integrating with other sort of systems around the business. And they just seem to be a constant cause of frustration that leads you to just build your own. And when you build your own, they're not great. They're more kind of short term, just to get you through the next phase of planning or whatever sort of you're delivering. So I think sort of simplified sort of reporting skills and dashboards would be a big help. And access, we were just talking about it earlier, but sort of access to the sort of wider marketplace, the sort of third-party content that really should be much more available and at one's fingertips than probably is at the moment. But hopefully that's sort of coming down the line.
That's really helpful. That's enormously helpful. I'm going to bring Anthony in very, very quickly to see whether or not that chimes, or whether you have an additional requirements on your wish list, Anthony.
I know it's very relevant to everybody, I think, and to all CFOs. I mean, a little bit of background about where I am, which is quite interesting, brings some context to this conversation. I actually work for a tech company, and when I first started here, what I found really interesting was the approach that they take towards digitalization. They're light years ahead of anybody else, and I have to admit that when I started, I found it quite hard to keep up myself, because I'd never worked for anywhere that was so advanced from a digital perspective, but that's been great, because I've had a huge amount of support from everybody internally to actually grow out a finance function and all of the information requirements within the business. So, we've built all sorts of bespoke systems internally. We make sure that all of our systems talk to each other. And when I raise the issue that Simon raises, which is we do need that one version of the truth, and we do have to have those information requirements to be made bespoke to the various stakeholders that need them. We had lots of support internally to make all the systems talk to each other, and we go through. And actually, what I did is I set up a data committee meeting that we have that actually talks about the different sources of data and how they all talk to each other, and how we make sure that all the APIs are used well, how all the data integrates, who's doing the data entry. And whilst it's not the most exciting thing, what you do get as a product out of that in a digitalized world is that almost that nirvana of, you can pick out a report that's very bespoke to an individual, and when they take that report that it's going to have all the information that they need to make the right decisions. So building on from that, I guess there are two points to that. One is it's to make sure that all of your staff have the right tools, the latest laptops, to make sure that they're all able to to utilize video conferencing. And actually, when everybody moved out and started to work remotely, we spent a lot of money to make sure that all of our staff had, headphones, they had microphones, all these sort of things, because they make a massive difference. And integrating people into that digital world makes a huge difference. Automation, productivity, all of those things come off the back of that. So, and there's lots more that we can do. We haven't even talked about the AI question yet, but there's lots of potential to come from that.
Well, absolutely. And I think that what's fascinating during the COVID kind of overnight shift to home working is that people's mindsets have massively shifted about the need for not only hardware, but also the digital capabilities as well. And it's wonderful to hear you both actually talk about if we can get the single source of truth right, just imagine what you could do with it. And Simon talked about dashboards, you were talking there, and also about AI and beginning to think about, this could really fly if we got that single source of truth working really, really well with all the different inputs, but also outputs that are bespoke to individual roles as well. Wonderful. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for your thoughts on that. I'm going to bring in Clive now, because you were saying earlier about, the winners and losers, those who invest, those who don't invest. Those who are investing, what are they particularly liking on their digital journey? And what other requirements would you flag?
And what I'll build on, what Simon and Anthony said. I mean, really, it is the single version of truth. It's how you then organize that single version of truth. And I think you've got to look away from the traditional accounting systems, and particularly systems that did everything, into cloud-based solutions, what you might call lean financial core, or around which you build a lot of the applications that Simon was talking about. I think the challenge for the middle market is actually there isn't the range of software that there is in the smaller enterprises or in the larger enterprises to enable you to do that yet. So we're not quite at that position, but you've got to start almost replatforming, as the phrase is, to build out, to bolt on best-of-breed solutions around a digital core and recognize those are cloud-based solutions now, and change your technology model to reflect how you manage that data, with all of these systems talking to each other through API technology and other things. So it's a fundamentally different landscape, but in the middle tier, there is, I think, a need to invest and to bring some solutions to the market that are actually going to help, particularly as analytics and insights, and as Simon said, crucially, the planning, budgeting, forecasting to be more in real time, to break out of some of these cycles that we've got stuck into.
And your remark about shifting the tech stack is really salient, because cloud has really proved its worth, particularly over the last year, and thinking about be able to add new functionality as well, which is fantastic. So Gary, can I bring you in here as well? When you're talking to the startups, but also from your sort of mid-market expertise as well, digital tools that really are empowering. And then if you had a wish list as you looked ahead, what might that be?
Well, I think if COVID's done one thing, is it's made people realise that the future is the important part of a CFO's job. Because probably for some medium-sized enterprises in the past, if you'd said to the CFO and the CEO, what do you think your numbers will be like next year? They'd probably say they're going to be 10 or 15% above what we did last year. Now, what's happened with COVID is that's just thrown that totally out. So, there's a friend of mine runs an overseas villa company, and you might imagine what's happened with his business, where in the year, probably last year, they did something like 20% of what they'd done in the previous year, and in this year they just don't, even where we are now, they don't know what sort of season they're going to have. So the emphasis is really, the CEO will often be saying to the CFO, what happens if this unfolds? And they're looking for like 4 or 5 different scenarios, but also with the responses to those. So the CFO has got to be saying, well, don't worry, if that happens, I can lengthen our cash cycle by doing the following, or I can draw down on this facility. And it's, the poor CFO is often bogged down with compliance issues in terms of, reporting about the past, but sadly, that's not the important part of their job. It's about trying to predict the future and how they're going to respond to that, and getting the right tools in place to do that.
And sort of hearing you talk about the relationship between the CEO and the CFO, and the suggestion that that's got even tighter sort of during COVID as well, and having any sort of technology and tools that will make that conversation more strategic, more compelling, and more immediate. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, and some of it's born out of desperation, because the CEO is basically nowadays saying, how many more months have we got before we run out of cash if this keeps going? So and ideally the CFO is already ahead of that game, because they've run the scenarios and they're going to see the CEO with probably 3 upside cases and 3 downside cases, because let's face it, from a business point of view, there are winners from something like COVID, and there are also losers, particularly like my friend in the hospitality industry.
Yes, and I think must be hanging on to every instruction and every update from the Prime Minister's office. Hang on to every single word. Clive, can I bring you back in? I wanted to look ahead a little in this last section of the roundtable. Is to think about the challenges that lie ahead and what we should be particularly mindful as well. Greatest risks, new opportunities. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. Yes, it's an interesting one, predicting the future from where we are. Yes, there is still going to be uncertainty, and as we've talked about, mental health, talent issues are really going to play to the fore still, and we can't ignore those. The other reality, I think, is the whole ESG agenda continues to build out. Yes, we may innocently and probably quite correctly have taken our eye off the ball of it for some extent over the past 18 months. Net zero, climate change hasn't stopped. And no matter where you are in the supply chain, you are going to be impacted by disclosures, the need to include this in your performance metrics, the need to recognize that funding is increasingly around an ESG agenda and evaluated and praised around an ESG agenda. So traceability, all these things mean you've got to bring the whole non-financial measurement as well as the financial in, and look at performance in a broader sense. There's a lot of conversation, I think, about organizational purpose, and finding the pandemic actually having taught us that purpose is not just profit. And part of that is how we add more to society. And something Simon and Anthony have talked about are part of that agenda as well, and Gary as well. So it's building forward, but recognizing that the immediate challenges have suddenly become more acute in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
You can see how the financial reports and the annual reports are going to change slightly in their tone. And I think the purpose point is really important. If I think of all the interviews that I've done with very, very senior people, the conversation about purpose comes through time and again. Simon, can I just test that idea with you? And also, love to hear your thoughts about, as you look at the road ahead, what are you focused on, and any new opportunities arising?
I think so. Yes, no, absolutely. I think, as I said earlier, in terms of the way we've evolved what is quite an old school sort of professional services offering to a more kind of tech enabled, I think the future is about looking at that roadmap and understanding and getting some real sort of strategic insight into where that's going to lead us, because it's not typically a sort of type of business that would lend itself to sort of disruption or tech, but we're very aware of that. And some of these tech guys seem to be able to disrupt any industry they sort of walk into. Ultimately, I guess also the sort of the eternal search for the top talent for us, again, are a people business. So finding, hiring and retaining. We're doing a lot more in terms of our existing staff, just not making it all about the, sort of the new guys that we're looking for, because ultimately that's how we're defined. We're only as good as our sort of people. So that's really important. I guess post-Brexit, I mean, we do our work across the globe, working in the pharmaceutical industry. We have to be able to sort of get around the place and work in different territories. And so, yeah, Brexit as kind of, making us kind of sit outside the EU is definitely a challenge. And we're obviously working hard to make sure that we're not kind of cut off in any way from those markets, even just on the softer side in terms of how our customers view us. I think probably, we've talked about digitalization. I mean, in just looking from a CFO's perspective, in sort of the investment, there's quite a lot more we want to do, but also that has to be balanced against profitability and cash flow. So understanding where that's going to lead us. And ultimately, also, if we're gonna go out and go for some sort of additional growth, at some point we'll need a bit of investment. So access to funds, I think, is always a hot potato. It's sort of it's obviously gone through an unusual time, but I suspect sort of that will become sort of a fairly important point as well in the not too distant future. So yeah, just a whole collection of different things, some macro, some micro, for us, but they probably would resonate with kind of most people, particularly in professional services businesses such as the one I work in.
Yeah, most definitely, and it will be interesting to see how the attitude of the VCs and the PE firms will shift as well. Building on Gary's comments from earlier, I mean, Gary, let me bring you in here. I'd love to hear your thoughts about, as you look at the road ahead, what should we be paying attention to? Any opportunities opening up?
I think the saying that anyone who starts a business during a recession has probably done a very good thing. So if you can get through that, you're probably extremely well placed to motor out of it. What I've personally seen is some of the businesses that have started up in the B2B side have found it very, very difficult to get up and running. Now, part of that is it's very difficult trying to sell your product when you can't actually meet people face to face. And that's even before you start talking about the fact that, budgets have been cut and people are conserving cash. I do see certainly in the some glimmers of hope there, where certainly some of the businesses are now starting to land initial clients to do work with. And the VCs seem to be back at the party again. Probably, I think valuations are, depending on your view, lower than where they were before, which is either a good or a bad thing. But they are now looking for the right sort of businesses to invest in. And what I see is that if a business has got it right, in so much that they do have a good product, and it's going to be backed up by decent customer service and well thought through marketing effort, then they are raising money again. But I think B2C is easier to raise money in than B2B at the moment. Those would be my reflections on what I'm seeing.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Gary. And Anthony, Simon was talking about the tech guys. I don't want to put a label on you, but you're our tech guy. So again, from Adaptive's point of view, I mean, you say you're at the real edge. You're building new technologies and new capabilities all the time. And as you look ahead down the road, where do you see the greatest investment going in? But partly not only to help your clients, but also in your purview as CFO of an MME.
The markets are being driven very heavily by digitalization at the moment. I mean, obviously, COVID has worked fantastically for us because now that we're starting to come out of it, all of the major, investment banks and anybody in financial services now looking at their tech stacks and, as Clive had said, looking to re-platform, whether it be in finance or just generally across the business at large. So there's huge opportunities for us there. Where do I see the challenges of that? Well, tech moves so quickly. It's really trying to stay at the front of that and understand where the value comes from new technology and how people are going to invest in it, how people are going to use it. We could talk all day about that, but where I see the real challenges for us, especially being a tech business, are really around three things that sort of centralize on the people that we have. And they are sort of culture, diversity, and the environmental challenges that we face. I mean, for individuals, it's very, very hard to hire good talent these days because the young people come into work these days. They're very bright, they know exactly what they want, and they expect more from a job as just a salary at the end of the month. They're asking the questions: is this business relevant? Are we relevant within the business? Do I actually enjoy doing this? Does it make a difference? Does it challenge me on a day-to-day basis? So it's very, very different to when I started out many years ago. And I like that. And I think that energy that those new people bring into businesses is both an advantage and a disadvantage. It's an advantage because you can learn from it and it helps your business to grow. It helps you to become relevant. It's a disadvantage because it's very hard to manage, because if somebody sees something, where the leadership's dropping off or the business becomes less relevant than they want it to be, then it's very easy for them to move elsewhere because they're very talented individuals and there's no shortage of opportunities for those types of individual in the current markets. So that's really difficult to manage. And then, of course, there's the whole environmental thing. I mean, how do we manage that? It's still very much in its infancy, but I think everybody these days has a big focus on that. And I just think it's going to become a much, much bigger issue in the next decade or so than it is now. And anything that can help from a technological perspective that's going to support that is going to be a real advantage to any business, really. So
that goes back to Clive's comments earlier about the net zero. We must not forget that there are very clear targets ahead, and the ESG discussion as well.
Absolutely.
I've got a question that's come in, actually. I just wondered if I could I'm going to open this up to anybody who'd like to take it, which is when we think about the talent conversation, and when it comes to hiring really talented CFOs, do you see a race in your peer group for talented CFOs going towards MMEs that have invested in great digital tools? Or are they generally sort of quite happy with the status quo? Who'd like to take that one?
I don't mind picking that one up. I think whether it's CFOs, finance people, or anybody else for that matter, I think, referencing the point I made earlier, people are asking the question, is it relevant and is this a place that I want to work? And I think an organization that is on the front foot from a digitalized perspective is definitely more attractive than a business that isn't. The days of wading through Excel spreadsheets and, gluing things together and trying to turn out reports at the end of the month are really tiresome these days. And so if you walk into a business that has addressed that problem and has used tech to address that problem, it just gives you, as a CFO or a finance professional, so much opportunity to add value elsewhere in the business. And I think the CFO's role these days, and particularly in MMEs, is not just the numbers. It encompasses so many other responsibilities. And I think that's a great thing because it gives you a lot more satisfaction in what you're doing. And it answers that question again of, am I relevant in an organization? And is that organization relevant? And I'm not going to slate investment banks, but I would never want to go back to working in an investment bank because they're so big. I don't think they offer that level of opportunity to people these days. So yeah, I think there is some truth in that.
Mm-hmm. Love to hear a second voice on that. Who'd like to come in? Perhaps Clive, from a membership point of view, are you getting a feeling that when talent is shifting towards those organisations that have invested in digital tools, that is becoming more appealing?
Yes, I think so. I think there are a couple of things about the CFO role, and Gary said it as well. The CFO-CAO nexus is absolutely crucial for organisations now. The CFO role is no longer just about the finance. It's about the strategy, the future of the organisation, the insights. The compliance side is one portion, but it's only a small portion. And therefore, those CFOs that can do that, have learned that ability, are really quite precious in the market at the moment, as I understand. And it's about investing in those skills. And everybody needs to invest. Continuous learning is something that's relevant to all of us now. So yes, I think the opportunities are there if you take it the right way.
Wonderful. Listen, I have to tell you, it's amazing how time disappears. We've had the most incredible conversation. If you think about it, we've reflected on the pandemic, what's meant from multiple different perspectives, thought about digitization, where we need to invest, the tools that would be on your wish list, as well as those capabilities today, and then also looked ahead and really thought about the requirements coming down the track, both at a macro and also micro level, technical and also operational and human as well. So thank you all so much for your comments. I just want to take a moment, particularly Clive, thank you to ACCA as well for all your support. I know that Karen Rudich, CEO of Elementary B is on one of your roundtables tomorrow as well. So looking forward to that very much. I know that the event's invite only, but to all the audience, there will be a report, no doubt. So stay close and we'll make sure that you get a copy of that as well, if that's appropriate. The other thing is, it's very interesting sort of looking at everything that Elementary B is doing at the moment, and it's winning awards left, right and centre. I think particularly actually one event I hosted, which was the Women in Payments Unicorn Challenge, where Elementary B won the audience award for a business that was seen to be most applicable in the world of fintech, supporting CFOs in the MME market. But also Innovate Finance have got their Pitch 360 competition. Elementary B is a finalist, and that's coming up on Thursday. So you can vote. If you go to Innovate Finance, you can also vote. There's no harm in doing a plug. I think we should support everybody who's entering competitions these days to stand apart. But listen, let me just take a moment to thank you all very much indeed. Everybody who's joined today. There will be follow-ups, of course. It's been great to have your company today, but I particularly want to take a moment to thank Simon, Anthony, Gary and Clive for all your insights. Thank you very much indeed for being with us today. And I've been Julia Streets. Thanks for tuning in, and do sign up for future events, because this won't be the last discussion by any stretch of the imagination. Thanks for being with us.